Okay, so today's reading is Izumi Kyōka's Kōya Hijiri, translated into English as The Saint of Mount Kōya, published in 1900. And I was sitting over there at the bench, but I was ousted by a family, so I'm going to have to walk around and do this. So we'll make it as brief as possible. Izumi Kyōka, one of the great writers of the 20th century, born in 1873, died in 1939. Novelist, born in Ishikawa Prefecture, in the city of Kanazawa, a disciple of Ozaki Koyo, right? So he was affiliated with the Kenyusha group that was prominent in the Meiji period. Affiliated with them when he was young, but I think he moved away from them, or the group disbanded after a while. He made his debut as a writer of the socially oriented problem novels, or kannen shōsetsu, right, in his early career, such as Gekashitsu, The Operating Room of 1895, published in 1895, Yako Junsa, published in 1895, same year, translated as, actually there's no translation of it, but it means The Night Patrolman. But his true forte was the creation of a romantic and melodramatic world of fantasy, described in a densely imagistic style, right? So fantasy is the key word there. His works are classifiable as fantasy works, I think. His great translator into English, Charles Inouye, professor at Harvard, I think, titled his collection of short stories Gothic Tales, I think, right? So there's a Gothic element to his work. Works in this vein include Teriha Kyogen, Koya Hijiri, which we're reading today, Uta Andong, Song of the Troubadour, and Mayukakushi no Re, The Ghost with Hidden Eyebrows, right? Alright, so many of these works translated. We'll be reading his most famous work, I think, is this one. We'll be reading that today. Okay, so look at your study guide, study questions. Right, I'm just going to go through these very quickly. Discuss the first narrator. What is his function in the narrative, right? So there are two narrators in this story. It's a frame story structure, right? There's narrator 1, and then narrator 1 runs into narrator 2 on the train, and narrator 2 then proceeds to narrate his story, which takes up most of the novel, I think, right? So the first question refers to narrative 1. What is his function in the narrative? And by the way, these narrator 1 and narrator 2 are kind of symbols or emblems, or they occupy the two worldviews, main worldviews that existed in Japan in 1900. Narrator 1 is sort of an instance of the modern worldview, right? Narrator 2, who he runs into on the train, is an example of the pre-modern, or the early modern, or the pre-Meiji worldview, right? So think of these two narrators as occupying, or as instantiating two kind of opposing worldviews, or views of reality, right? Number 2, discuss the itinerant priest Shucho, the saint of Mount Kōya, right? So he's narrator 2. Discuss this narrator 2. Where does narrator 1 first meet him? Where do they stay together? How is he different from most priests? Question number 3. As I mentioned, the story is a frame story structure. Describe this structure. Note the frequent interruptions in the frame story. Okay, and you want to keep in mind that the frame structure story is probably the most common narrative structure in Meiji literature. You see it all the time. You see it in Natsume Soseki's Kokoro, I think, is an example of it. You see it, I think we saw it in Koda Rohan's Taidokoro. You see it all over the place. Alright? However, there are frequent interruptions in the frame story, so you want to be careful to note those. So occasionally narrator 1 thrusts his head forth in the narrative and says, don't forget about me, I'm still the narrator in this story. Right? Number 4, describe the seedy medicine peddler from Toyama, who appears at one point. What provocative comment does he make to Shucho? What fate does he ultimately meet, right? So why does he appear in the story out of the blue? And what is the point of his existence in the story? Number 5, summarize Shucho's story, right? So I think in the translation we're reading on page 5, this frame story by Shucho begins, and it continues to page 33. Okay, and it depicts a series of events: his encounter with the seedy medicine peddler, his decision to follow him down the dangerous narrow road, the insects, snakes, caterpillars, bird eggs, and leeches that he encounters along the way, the hut, the woman inside the hut, the bathing scene, the dinner scene, his feelings for the woman, his crisis of faith, etc. Alright, discuss the idiot. Alright, who is this idiot? He's described as the idiot, the hakuchi, I think was the word used in the Japanese. Right? Describe his relationship with the woman. Number 7. A weary traveler from the city descends into the provinces and stumbles upon a lone hut in the middle of a forest with a beautiful, mysterious, elegant woman in it. Alright, so that's the main sort of plot for this work. Where have we seen this basic storyline before? How is this story similar to or different from the other stories that we read that have a similar plot? Right? Is this story also didactic? Why is this basic story structure so common, right? And I think this basic story structure has its roots in classical Japanese literature, right? So Izumi Kyōka, in a sense, is reacting against the kind of novels that Tsubō-shōyo was advocating, right? According to Tsubō-shōyo, you shouldn't draw from the past. You shouldn't borrow past story structures or story characters or tropes or images. You should write reality as it is in front of you, directly as it is. And Izumi Kyōka is kind of saying no. These sort of deep structures exist within our culture, within any culture, and we must not forget about them. Because to forget about them, it means the impoverishment of art, and of literature, and so forth, right? So that last question of number 7 is, why is this basic story structure so common? Okay, speculate on that. Number 8, discuss the woman. Right, a simple question about this main female character of the story. What is her personality, her cravings, her desires, her situations, her powers, etc.? Right? What multiple female archetypes is she a combination of? Explain. So again, we have Izumi Kyōka saying to Tsubō-shōyo, no, I'm not going to write about women as they exist right in front of me. I'm going to write about these deeper archetypes that exist in our literary tradition that goes back to China, and I'm going to employ aspects of that, right? Explain. 9. Discuss the nude bathing scene. By the way, I should mention that this work has been made into an erotic, pornographic film, too, by a fairly famous director, I think. And you can find it if you look online. And it was made into a pornographic film because of this scene, of course, this famous nude bathing scene. Why do the animals, the toads, the bats, the rodent monkeys, etc., gather around her as she, naked, washes the naked Shucho? Right, so there are little hints of this. You learn exactly who these animals are at the end, of course, but there are little hints, little foreshadowings throughout in the beginning. Number 10. Discuss the representations of nature in the work. What kind of nature are we dealing with? How is nature contrasted with culture? Which is privileged, right? So a lot of times in sort of stereotypical depictions of East, of the Orient, you see this idea that the Orient has this idea of nature as nice and friendly and kind to humans, and humans existing in perfect equanimity and perfect harmony and perfect peace with nature. Alright, so that's the idea that we see of nature in this story is very, very different from that sort of stereotypical or Orientalist idea. Right? What is nature in this work? Is nature friendly to humans, or is it sort of a horrific, grotesque, terrible thing? Alright, number 11. Discuss the bestiality scene. Alright, so this story has a famous scene of bestiality. The horse, Old Blue, although it's pretty vague, I don't know if it's actually an instance of bestiality, but it's pretty close, I think. I read it recently in our Zemi, in the original, and it, yes, it's a little bit ambiguous, but it seems like they're engaging in some sort of sexual act. The horse, Old Blue, is the present manifestation of whom? How and why was he transformed into a horse? Okay, number 12. Why do the animals, the sheep, the birds, the squirrels, the cows, etc., gather at night once the woman, Shucho, and the idiot go to bed? So why have the animals congregated? What are they trying to do? And how does Shucho quiet them down? Number 13. Discuss the old man. Summarize the story he tells Shucho in episode 26 of the story. Is his story about the woman believable, right? So on the 13 points to keep in mind when reading any narrative, I mention, of course, the very important question of each character's reliability. Is this old man to be believed? Is what he's saying reliable? Discuss. And 14, discuss the ending. Did Shucho make the right choice in the end? What effect does his story have on narrator 1? Right? Okay, so at the end, I think at the very end of the story, we return to narrative 1. So the frame story closes by leaving narrator 2, Shucho, and returning to the young, modern guy who's leaving Tokyo and going out into the woods. And although I didn't write this on the study questions, another important question to consider is this difference between country and city. I think I mentioned this the other day in another story, context of another story. But what is the city in this story, in this work? What does the city mean? What is the city associated with? What worldview is the city associated with? And contrasted with that, what is the country? What world, what sort of mode of existence or worldview is the country associated with, okay? So that's the end of all the questions. So at the very end of the study guide, I have a list of place names and cultural particularities that appear, and I've filled out some of them, but continue to make a list and describe them as you read. Hida, right? I have a student a few years ago from Hida no Kuni, which is today's Gifu Prefecture. Shinshu, actually I have many students from Gifu at this school out here in Nagoya. Shinshu, today is Nagano Prefecture, Shinshu no Kuni. So these are the place names, and there aren't too many, but it's very important to keep track of place names as they appear in the work, right? So to be aware of where they are generally on a map, right? Kakigawa, Eiji, okay. And you can look up the names of the temples and whatnot that appear in it too. Names of the villages. Alright, that's all for my commentary on the study guide for Izumi Kyōka's Kōya Hijiri, which is the assigned work for this week. That is all. Goodbye.